Finally, the last two forces of the five forces model deal with how the rents are distributed. Okay, if an industry is able to keep all the rents generated, then the industry will be more attractive. If the industry is not so able, these rents will be distributed amongst or with the customer industry or with the supplier industry, and the industry will be a bit less attractive. So we have to consider which is the bargaining power against our supplying industry and the bargaining power of our customer industry. These are two different forces, but the way of analyzing it, the questions we are going to ask ourselves are very similar. Okay, so the problem is that it can be confusing, but the first thing we have to do is, for instance, we are going to analyze the fourth force, the bargaining power of our suppliers. So we have to consider who is our supplying industries. For instance, we are, let us say, food retailing industry. We are Mercadona, Carrefour, the food retail industry. Who is the supplying industry? The supplying industry is food producing industry. So, if we are food retailing, we have to consider the bargaining power of food producers. Well, which things have we got to consider? Well, first of all, sometimes we will have more than one supplying industries in some cases, but in this case, in this example, we are going to simplify it. Okay, so we have to consider different questions, different factors. First of all, are my supplying industries more concentrated than mine? If they are more concentrated than mine, problem for us, negative for us. Okay, less attractiveness. If we are more concentrated, then more attractiveness. In this case, who is more concentrated? The food retailing or the food producing? The food retailing, clearly. Okay. So, in fact, this increases the attractiveness of the food retail industry. Is the purchase volume of my industry low or high? If we buy just few units, then we haven't got bargaining power. If I go to my supplier and I buy 3 units out of 3 millions, I have no bargaining power. If I buy a lot of units, then I have got a lot of bargaining power. Again, in this situation, in this example, the food retail industry buys a lot of the production of the food production industry, so high bargaining power. Is the product differentiated, yes or no? If the product of the supplying industry is differentiated, then the suppliers have got bargaining power. But if the product is undifferentiated, then the customers will buy to any supplier. Okay, so the bargaining power will be for the customer industry. So again, we are the food retail industry. Is the product of the food supplying industry differentiated or not? Well, this is the key. The food producers, try to differentiate their product. If they reach to do it, then they are going to have a bit of bargaining power. If they don't reach to do it, if a biscuit is a biscuit, okay, then it's going to be the food retail who has got bargaining power. Switching costs. If there are switching costs, then the suppliers will have bargaining power. If there are no switching costs, then the customers are going to have bargaining power. In this case, are there switching costs? For instance, I am selling oranges. I am Mercadona and I am selling oranges, and then they come from one exploitation. If I want to move to another orange producer, okay, will I have a lot of a lot of switching costs? And the answer is no. So again, food retail is more attractive than food producing. Can the supplier integrate vertically, distribute its own product? If the supplier can integrate vertically, okay, then it will have bargaining power. If they cannot, then it's a customer. In our case, we are the food retail industry. Can my producers of oranges, of cola, of whatever, can they sell their own products easily to the final market? Yes or no? In this case, well, they can sell it. Some firms do it, okay, but the majority don't. In fact, the cases of vertical integration are not so frequent. So we can say that, again, we have got bargaining power. The food retailing industry has got more bargaining power than the food producing industry. Then, are there perfect substitutive products? If there are perfect substitutive products, then it's going to be the customer who has got bargaining power. But if there aren't perfect substitutive products, it's going to be the supplier who has got bargaining power. Okay, so are there, in this case, are there perfect substitutives for food? Not really. Okay, not really. So in fact, it's the customer industry who hasn't got bargaining power, and in this case, the supplying industry who has got bargaining power. Is the product storable? If the product can be stored easily, then it's the customer who has got bargaining power. But if the product cannot be stored, okay, then it's the supplier who has got bargaining power. Why? Because the supplier can close the tab. Okay, so you are not going to have more product because I don't want. Okay, in the case of food retail, well, it depends. If we are talking about fresh food cannot be so easily storable. If we are talking about dry food can be easily stored. Okay, so that's it. Then, is the product relevant for the customer? If the product is relevant for the customer, then it's the supplier who has got bargaining power. If the product is not relevant, not especially relevant for the customer, then it's the customer who has got bargaining power. Is food especially relevant for the food retail industry? Yes. So in this case, the food producers have got a bit of bargaining power. Finally, has the supplier the information in its hands? If the information is mainly in the hands of the customer, then the customer industry has got bargaining power. If it's the supplier who has got more information, then it's the supplying industry who has got bargaining power. Okay. Now let's move to the opposite situation. Now we are the supplying industry. Fifth force. We are considering which is the bargaining power of our customers. Okay. So if we are the food retailing industry, who are our customers? The final customers. They are not an industry. Okay, let's analyze it. Are my customer industries more concentrated than mine? If they are more concentrated than mine, bad for us. Okay, bad for us. We have got no bargaining power, they do. If they are not concentrated, okay, good for us. We have got more bargaining power. In the case of food retailing industry, obviously the final customers are not concentrated at all. Okay, then, is the purchase volume of my customers low? Well, if my customers just buy a few ones, okay, if the volume is low, then we have got bargaining power as suppliers. If they buy a lot, they have got bargaining power. In this case, my customers buy just a few ones, okay, so they have no bargaining power against the food retail industry. Is the product differentiated? If it is, then we have got bargaining power as suppliers. If it's not, then my customers will have got bargaining power. In this case of the food retailing industry, well, they try to be differentiated. They try to differentiate themselves through service. They are not so differentiated. We can switch from one retailer to another. Okay, are there switching costs? If there are switching costs, then the supplier has got bargaining power. If there aren't switching costs, then it's the customer who has got bargaining power. In the case of food retail industry, have we got switching costs for moving from Mercadona to Carrefour and so on? Not at all. So this is one of the powers we have got. Okay, the final customers against the food retailers. Can the client integrate vertically? Okay. If the client can integrate vertically, then it's a menace for the supplier. If the client cannot integrate vertically, then it's not a menace for the supplier. Then the supplier has got bargaining power. Okay. In this case, we are the food retailing industry. Is it possible that our final customers do the things for themselves, integrate themselves, retail their own products? This is absurd. Okay. So our food retailers have got bargaining power. Well, are there substitutive products, perfect substitutive products? If there are perfect substitutive products, well, bad for our industry. If there are not, good for our industry. So we are the food retailing industry. Are there good substitutive products? Well, maybe retail through the internet. Okay, not so good, but not so perfect, but good. Okay, so internet retail is a menace for traditional food retailing industry. Is the product storable? If the product can be stored, okay, if the product can be stored, then it's good for the customers. Remember, if the products cannot be stored, then it's good for the suppliers. Okay, the thing is that what I told you about food retailing industry. Is it easy for a final customer to have an enormous stock of whatever? No. So again, it's the food retailing industry who has got power. Okay. Is the product relevant for the customer? If the answer is yes, then the suppliers have got bargaining power. If the answer is no, then the customers have got bargaining power. Okay. Finally, has the customer the information in his hand? If the customer has got the information in his hand, okay, wrong for the suppliers. If the customer hasn't got the information in his hand, good for the suppliers. Okay, so that's it. So remember that we are making somehow the same analysis twice. In the first moment, we are considering ourselves the suppliers. Well, sorry, the customers. In the fourth force, we are the customer industry. We consider the bargaining power of our suppliers. In the fifth force, we are the supplying industry and we are analyzing the bargaining power of our customers. But the analysis is somehow the same. We are going to ask the same questions.